1 Samuel 1 through 3:2 this morning. So let's begin with 1 Samuel 1:1. Now there was a certain man from Ramathaim, Zophim, from the hill country of Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jehoram, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite, and he had 2 wives. The name of the one was Hannah, the name of the other was Peninnah, and Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. All right, Ephraim. This is not the same Ephraim who was the second son of Joseph, but probably in that line of lineage from them. And the guy had two wives. Now, polygamy was not at all uncommon in the Old Testament. And the Mormons, before they were forbidden to have polygamy by law, and still some of them do it outside the law, but they based that on the fact that men in the Bible had more than one wife. But it was common, and today there are still cultures, particularly in Africa, where polygamy is practiced. And our missionaries run into a real issue when a man becomes a Christian and learns that the Christians don't believe in polygamy. And he already has several wives, and so that poses a dilemma in those cultures. And I don't know how you solve that. How do you choose which wife to disregard, which one to keep? And I hope that we are not too straight and narrow on that in those cultures where people become a Christian. Hannah had no children. Now, Elkanah, the husband, that word literally means the zeal of God. And look at verse 3. Now this man, that's Elkanah, would go up to his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. So the word is the zeal of God. He lived that out in that he went yearly to Shiloh to sacrifice. Now why did he go to Shiloh? Well, in that day, Shiloh was it was the pre-runner of Jerusalem. There was no Jerusalem at that time, and Shiloh was the center of worship for Jewish people. So that's the reason he went to Shiloh. And the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests to the Lord there. And when the day came that Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah, his wife, and to all her sons and her daughters. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah. But the Lord had closed her womb. Now, one of the things that makes that so tragic is that in that day, and even in the New Testament day, Jewish people believed that a woman lived only through her offspring. Remnants of that were still very real in the New Testament time. You'll remember in 1 Peter 2, that chapter ends with the phrase, "A woman shall be saved through faith," and then it adds through childbirth. And so it was still prevalent even in the New Testament. So Hannah was really heavy-hearted because she didn't see any chance of living on without offspring. Now, are any of you troubled at all by the phrase, the Lord closed her womb. Does that bother any of you? We were married 6.5 years before we had a daughter. And we were trying for 3 years to have a daughter. And I figured it was Charlotte's fault. And we went to our family doctor in Siloam Springs, Arkansas, and talked to him about adoption, because we wanted children. And he said, hold off. He said, Bill, I think you've got academic sterility. Phrase that was new to me. And I asked him to explain that. And he said, well, you're in school full-time, and you're pastoring a full-time church, and you're under too much pressure to have a baby. And as soon as you get out of seminary, you all will probably have a baby. And Judy was conceived 1 month after I finished seminary.
He was a prophet.
Now the point is, did the Lord close Charlotte's womb? Or was it my fault? It was my fault. Then we started trying to have a second child. And 6.5 years later, we had a second child. And it was Charlotte's fault. She had anemia, and she had no energy at all. And the doctor kept giving her iron. And we moved to Knoxville, and our family doctor sent her to a hematologist. And the hematologist called us one night at 11 o'clock at home. He was an Indian doctor. And he says, Eureka! Eureka! I have found it. Charlotte had a thyroid problem. And he gave her thyroid medication, and she became pregnant a month later. Did the Lord really close Hannah's womb? Why does the scripture say that? Well, because everything that happened to religious people in that time, good, bad, and indifferent, was because of the Lord declaring it. Earthquakes, droughts, rain, good and bad. If you were religious, the Lord caused it.
Well, and you know, like the other that we talked about several weeks ago in Exodus, I guess, is where, you know, the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart.
I'm sorry?
The Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart
Yes.
toward the Israelites, you
Yeah.
know, and so that's a little troubling too.
Yeah,
Like,
sure.
why would he do that?
But that's what they believe,
Right.
you know. Everything that happened, good or bad, was the Lord's fault. Now, there is a strain of Christianity today where everything that good happens is because of God. And that's not always the case. But it's good for your heart to declare that, whether it's the case or not. All right, let's pick back up with any other questions about that before we move on. All right, let's pick back up with verse 4. And when the day came that Elkanah sacrificed, we've read that. Verse 5, we read it. Verse 6, look at verse 6. Her rival, however, would provoke her bitterly to irritate her because the Lord had closed her womb. Can you imagine the kind of tension that goes on in a polygamous family? I mean, it's beyond my comprehension. And this is just one example of the kind of tension that happens. Verse 7, And it happened year after year, as often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she would provoke her. So she, meaning Hannah, wept and would not eat. Then Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep, and why do you not eat, and why is your heart sad? Am I not better to you than 2 sons? Well, she still wouldn't live on if she didn't have a baby. Then Hannah arose after eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli, the priest, was sitting on the seat by the doorpost of the temple of the Lord, and she, greatly distressed, prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. And she made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look on the affliction of thy maidservant, and remember me, and not forget thy maidservant, but wilt give thy maidservant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and a razor shall never come on his head. Let's break that down a little bit. Does it sound like Hannah was bargaining with God? Sounds a lot like it to me. You ever know anyone who's bargained with God? Did any of us ever bargain with God?
Only all of us.
Yeah. Well, there she was, making a bargain with God. And, you know, if you couldn't live on except through your offspring, and you had an offspring, to let someone else raise your offspring, as troubling as that might be to you, still worth eternal life. And so she made this bargain with God, and we're going to find out.
You know, way back there, Moses, I don't know if he was bargaining with God, but he sure argued with him
Yeah.
about the people that he was going to.
yeah.
And I
For
think
sure.
God's okay with us when
Yeah.
we talk, maybe in argue sometimes. He may never go through with what we want him to do, but I think he's okay with us asking.
Oh, yeah. I think he's okay with this argument.
Yeah, yeah,
He's big enough to handle it.
yeah.
I used to question that after reading Job, you know, and he goes on for 4 chapters berating Job
Yeah.
when Job did that, but I don't know, something's kind of worn away, and I'm a little more belligerent now, I guess, than I was when I was younger,
Yeah.
because I'll argue with God sometimes.
Sure.
Probably shouldn't, but.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a mark of honesty. Do you two ever argue? You don't have to answer that. But you know, when you love someone enough and are intimately enough with them, disagreement's gonna come. And if you can get those disagreements out in the open and express them, it's a sign of intimacy. And so I think it's a sign of intimacy when we argue with God. Now, why in the world did it say that Hannah say, if you'll give me a boy, I'll never let a razor touch his head?
That's part of being a Nazarite.
Nazarite.
Like
Samson. Razor never touched his head till he met a wicked woman. Now, verse 12. Now it came about as she continued praying before the Lord that Eli was watching her mouth. Now, Eli's old. He may have been partially deaf, you know. He watched her mouth. As for Hannah, she was speaking in her heart. Only her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. So Eli thought she was drunk. Then Eli said to her, how long will you make yourself drunk? Put away your wine from you. But Hannah answered and said, no, my Lord. I am a woman of oppressed in spirit. I've drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I poured out my soul before the Lord. Do not consider your maidservant to be a worthless woman, for I've spoken up until now out of my great concern and provocation. Then Eli answered and said, go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant your petition that you've asked of him. And she said, let your maidservant find favor in your sight. So the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. She was a woman of real faith. And let's look at verse 19. Then they arose early in the morning and worshipped before the Lord, and returned again to the house of Ramah. And Elkanah had relation with Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. Here it is, praising God for good things that happened. And it came about in due time that Hannah had conceived, that she gave birth to a son, and she named him Samuel, saying, because I've asked him of the Lord. Then the man Elkanah went up with his household to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and pay his vow. But Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, I will not go up until the child is weaned. Then I will bring him, that he may appear before the Lord and stay there forever. And Elkanah, her husband, said to her, do what seems best to you. Remain until you've weaned him. Only may the Lord confirm his word. So the woman remained and nursed her son until she weaned him. Now when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, with a 3-year-old bull and an ephah of flour and a jug of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord in Shiloh, although the child was young. Then they slaughtered the bull and brought the boy to Eli. And she said, O my Lord, as your soul lives, my Lord, I'm the woman who stood here beside you, praying to the Lord. For this boy I prayed, and the Lord has given me my petitions which I ask of him. So I have also dedicated him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he's dedicated to the Lord. And he worshiped the Lord there. Now, why that phrase, and he was young? Right after they talked about all the things that they brought for a sacrifice. Was it because he was not cognizant of any sin in his life? You sacrifice for your sin. But they sacrificed for Samuel, even though he was just weanable age. And that's how much they believed in making things right before God. I'm telling you, this was quite a woman, Hannah was. Can you imagine the heartbreak of leaving your child in the care of an old man? I mean, that had to be some faith on her part that this gal was going to treat her boy right. And then she prays this prayer in chapter 2 that is a beautiful prayer. Thanksgiving to the Lord. And in verse 11, then Elkanah went to his home at Ramah, but the boy ministered to the Lord before Eli the priest. We don't know for sure how old Samuel was at this point. Many scholars believe he was about 3 years of age, and but they don't know. None of us do. But he was young. He was very young. And she left him there. Any questions up to that point? All right. beginning with the 12th verse, we find the sins of Eli's sons. We'll work our way quickly through that. Now, the sons of Eli were worthless men. They did not know the Lord. And the custom of the priest with the people, when any man was offering a sacrifice, the priest's servant would come while the meat was boiling, and with a three-pronged fork in his hand, he would thrust it into the pan, the kettle, or the cauldron, or the pot, and all that the fork brought up, the priest would take for himself. Now, this was a custom, but they usually only took enough to sustain themselves. These two guys were thieves, and they took all they could. And they were wicked priests. Have you ever heard of Elmer Gantry? Some of you are old enough to remember Elmer Gantry. I saw that movie right after I made the decision that the Lord was calling me to preach. And it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. To see what can happen to a minister who is greedy, who is wicked, who is sinful. And I am so glad that I saw that movie when I did. It scared the liver out of me. It did. And I'm telling you right now that pastors can come under severe temptation. It can be tremendous temptation. And a lot of pastors succumb. And I have no way of trying to defend a pastor who lives in a $5 million home, who owns a jet airplane, who lives like a king. That is so foreign to the life of Jesus and the life that he calls us to emulate. I hope and pray that none of you have ever experienced the tragedy of being a pastor, being a member of a church where a pastor has gone astray. But for the life of me, I can't understand people joining a church where the pastor's lifestyle is so foreign to the lifestyle of the one who calls us to minister. Enough of that. These two boys were wicked people. And unfortunately, others have followed suit. Verse 18. Now Samuel was ministering before the Lord as a boy, wearing a linen ephod. And his mother would bring him a little robe and bring it to him from year to year when she would come up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. I mean, the boy was growing. He was outgrowing the clothes she had brought the year before. Then Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife and say, "May the Lord give you children from this woman in place of the one she dedicated to the Lord." And they went to their home, and the Lord visited Hannah, and she conceived and gave birth to 3 sons and 2 daughters. And the boy Samuel grew before the Lord. Now, she didn't know she was going to have 3 more boys and 2 girls when she left Samuel at the temple under the care of Eli. In verses 22 through 26, Eli rebuked his sons, and let's pick that up in verse 27. Then a man of God came to Eli and said to him, Thus saith the Lord, did I not indeed reveal myself to the house of your father when they were in Egypt in bondage to Pharaoh's house? And did not I choose them from all the tribes of Israel to be my priests, to go up to my altar, to burn incense, to carry an ephod before me? And did I not give to the house of your father all the fire offerings of the sons of Israel? Why do you kick at my sacrifice and my offering, which I have commanded in my dwelling, and honor your sons above me, by making yourselves fat with the choice of every offering of my people Israel? Therefore, the Lord God of Israel declares, I did indeed say that your house and the house of your father should walk before me forever. But now the Lord declares, far be it from me. For those who honor me, I will honor, and those who despise me will be lightly esteemed. Behold, the days are coming when I will break your strength and the strength of your father's house, so that there will not be an old man in your house. And you will see the distress of my dwelling, in spite of all that I do good for Israel. And an old man will not live in your house forever. Yet I will not cut off every man of yours from my altar, that your eyes may fall from weeping, and your soul grieve, and the increase of your house will die in the prime of life. And this will be a sign to you, which shall come concerning your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, on the same day. Both of them shall die. That's pretty heavy. But I will raise up for myself a faithful priest, who will do according to what is in my heart and in my soul. And I will build him an enduring house, and he will walk before my anointed always. And it shall come about that everyone who is left in your house shall come and bow down to him for a piece of silver or a loaf of bread, and say, please assign me to one of the priest's offices, so that I may eat a piece of bread. Doomsday's coming, and it did come. A little bit of context here. You're aware that one of the 12 tribes of Israel was to be a tribe of priests before the Lord. That's the context in which this is being declared. Any questions? Chapter 3. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord before Eli, and word from the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were infrequent. Now, this is not the only time that happened, folks. It was 500 years from the close of the Old Testament to the opening of the New Testament. Recorded as what's been called the interbiblical period. 500 years in which there was no word from God. Dark ages. And they were living in the dark ages here. And it happened at that time, as Eli was lying down in his place. Now his eyesight had begun to grow dim, and he could not see well, and the lamp of God had not yet gone out. And Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was, that the Lord called Samuel. And he, that is Samuel, said, here I am. We've gone a little further than we were supposed to go today. I'm assuming we're going to pick back up with the story of Samuel's call next week. But here it is. Dark days, no word from God, and God steps in and calls Samuel to be his priest. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, letting you out a little early, because if you haven't been to church yet, you need to get a good seat.
That is very true. Thank you, Bill.
You do first.